All right, I do want to switch gears here. Senator Elizabeth Warren is out with a new memoir, Persist, where she details the trials and tribulations of her life in politics and beyond. Now, the book also details some of the senator's plans to help out the middle class, something that she's become known for both on the campaign trail and on the Senate floor. And joining me now is Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, an author of Persist. Senator, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be with you.
Wonderful. All right, before we get into your book, I do want to jump into the breaking news that we got earlier today that Facebook's oversight board has kicked the can down the road on the length of former President Trump's suspension on that platform, requiring Facebook to specify a time on it within the next 6 months. Do you think former President Trump should be allowed back on Facebook?
Look, I'm glad that he's not on Facebook. I think that he poses a real danger, but I don't think Facebook ought to have this kind of power. We need to break up these giant tech companies, and Facebook is one of them. They are crushing competition, and in cases like Facebook, they're acting like they're bigger than government. The group that made this decision calls itself the Supreme Court. They are not the Supreme Court. They're part of a private company. They need to be broken up. We need a chance for competition to flourish here, and we need a chance to have some power that balances out what these giants are up to.
That is the irony, is that the members on this oversight board were not actually elected by the public, rather instated by Facebook, and that yet the oversight board kicking the can back to Facebook. So we'll see how it all plays out. But I do want to switch to your memoir here. The first chapter in your book speaking about your own lived experience being a working mom, and as presidential candidate, you did unveil a $700 billion universal child care plan. President Biden, too, unveiled money that he wants to spend on child care, less than yours, $225 billion. How important is child care to this economic recovery?
So think about the situation we were in before the pandemic. Mamas and some daddies struggling to get childcare so they could finish their education, so they could get to work, and then the pandemic hit. And literally millions of women who've been pushed out of the workforce. If we want to have an America of real opportunity for everyone, we need childcare. You know, think of it this way. We build roads and bridges in America, communications, broadband. Why? So people can get to work, so businesses can get their goods and services to market. Well, you know what? Child care is part of that. If we want to have a productive economy, then we need to make it possible for mothers and fathers to go to work, and that means invest in child care. And I'll add one more. Child care is also part of early childhood education. So this is good for the mamas and daddies and their careers and building an economic future, but it's also good for our babies, and it's also good for our child care workers who'll see their pay raised and see this treated like the valuable profession that it is.
And of course, we know women adversely and disproportionately impacted by this pandemic, having to quit their jobs or even scale back hours to pick up the burden of childcare during the past year or so. Now, despite President Biden campaigning on a moderate agenda, many have noted that he's now pushing for the most radical economic overhaul since FDR. As a progressive lawmaker, how do you grade the president?
Look, I'm really happy with the direction the president has gone, but let me remind everybody, he campaigned on a much more progressive agenda. That's what Build Back Better was about. He talked about child care during the campaign. He talked about taxing the wealthy to pay more. And now he's following through. Remember how the world has changed in the last year. We've lived through a pandemic, a racial reckoning, an armed insurrection, and now we have a new president, and that means it's a new moment, new obligations, and the best part from my perspective, a real chance to make big structural change. We got our toes on the line, and I wrote this book about the next 100 days, the changes we need to make in America to create opportunity for everyone.
And for viewers out there are your plans outlined in this book, Persist. Let's talk about another plan that you have, Senator. I want to get your take on someone that you know well, Biden's new student loan chief, Richard Cordray, the first director of the agency that you spearheaded, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Where does that leave the student loan forgiveness debate between you and President Biden? There's about $40,000 difference in student loan debt forgiveness per borrower that you've both supported. With this new student loan chief, where does that move the needle?
So I'm delighted that Rich Cordray is going to be at the Department of Education. Rich has spent his whole life in public service, out there fighting for hardworking families who just need a chance. And part of that is going to be student loans. For far too long, the Department of Education has run that student loan department as if it is just there to make profits for the loan servicers and for the federal government. And that's not right. Our families are getting crushed by student loan debt. So I'm going to keep pushing on President Biden. Chuck Schumer, the leader of the United States Senate's pushing alongside. He's a great partner in this. It's time to cancel $50,000 of student loan debt. Keep in mind, 40% of the people who are carrying student loan debt today never graduated from college. And that the racial wealth gap is being expanded because of student loan debt. African Americans have to borrow more money to go to school, borrow more money while they're in school, have a harder time paying it off when they get out of school. The single most powerful thing that the president could do all by himself to help close the racial wealth gap is to cancel $50,000 of student loan debt. This is something that is personal to tens of millions of Americans. Like I talk about in this book, back when I went to school, I could go to a state school for $50 a semester, finish my 4-year diploma, and become a special ed teacher. And I talk about that story, but that story isn't there for young people today. We need to make a bigger investment in their future, and that means cancel student loan debt and set up college and 2-year college and technical school so that people can complete their education without getting crushed by debt.
And we've seen President Biden support student loan debt forgiveness of $10,000 a borrower. We'll see if that needle actually does change going forward and we can get that number any higher. But let's shift to the economy as well, Senator Warren. The trillions of dollars of relief spending that we've seen because of that and more to come, anticipated to come, there is some real concern that prices will become more expensive for consumers. Are there pockets of this economy, particular pockets, where you're worried about inflation getting too hot?
No, I'm not worried about inflation. You know, every time we spend money and try to make investments, the Republicans start claiming it's going to create inflation. And for decades now, they've just been wrong. It has not had that effect. But even if inflation started to inch up, Janet Yellen plus the Fed have plenty of tools to bring it under control. That's not our problem right now. Our problem right now is that we have gone for 40 years of not making big enough investments in things like infrastructure, not making big enough investments in getting our babies and our older kids educated, not making big enough investments in housing, the things we need in order to have a secure future and to have opportunity for everyone. That's what we need to do. We need to get a wealth tax out there, raise some revenues, keep this economy just humming along.
All right, well, the jobs market finally gathering some steam, though we still do have a long way to go, and we are going to get that all-important jobs report on Friday. Are you optimistic that we'll see wages for the middle class start to recover as well? We know that that gap between the wealthiest and the poorest Americans diverging even more during this past year.
You know, I'm uneasy. We have talked for a long time now about the kind of conditions that should have produced more job growth, but it has not. You know, we've watched now this K-shaped recovery where If you started the pandemic rich, you got a whole lot richer. But if you didn't start it rich, this pandemic was a real slam. I think that the place that we need to keep rethinking how we discuss this is not only the comparison on income between the top and the bottom, but the comparison on wealth between the top, which is way up there, and the bottom. It's accumulated wealth that lets a handful of Americans sit back. They don't even have to work if they don't want to, and they get richer and richer and richer over time while everyone else struggles. And here's the thing. Last year, the 99% in America paid 7.2% of their total wealth in taxes. They've been doing that about every year. But the top 0.1%, that tiny little bit right up at the top, they paid about 3.2%, less than half as much. So when we talk about inequality, one thing we could do is put a wealth tax in place, 2-cent tax on every fortune over $50 million, a little bit more when you hit $1 billion. And that would begin to help equalize just a little, and would also give us the kind of resources to invest in universal child care, universal pre-K, canceling student loan debt, making college debt-free, investing in our historically Black colleges and universities, and have money left over.
Senator, I also want to get your take on infrastructure. President Biden unveiling a $2.3 trillion infrastructure plan dubbed the American Jobs Plan. And Republicans, they want infrastructure spending, but much less than what the president has proposed. What is the risk by not making these key investments in infrastructure like broadband, like 5G, that will help the U.S. better compete with China?
You know, you put it exactly the right way. We make investments in infrastructure because they increase our productivity. They make us more competitive all around the world. They let us produce more goods and services and move them around the world. We need to have a solution that is as big as the problem. And right now, we have underinvested for so long in our infrastructure that we are way behind. Roads and bridges that are crumbling, a communications system that is now decades old. But I want to put a pitch in this, and that is part of infrastructure is child care and senior care. You want people to be able to go to work, we have to have care that's available. Care that is affordable, that's high quality, and that's available where you are. That's how infrastructure will work. And you want to talk about jobs? I'm all for jobs in infrastructure, but that's not just construction jobs, jobs traditionally held by men. It's also caregiving jobs, jobs that are traditionally held by women. Let's make both of those good jobs, and plenty of them, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Good jobs, that term that we heard consistently in the unveiling of this plan. Senator, before we go, I want to ask you about your future. This book, your book, Persist, setting the stage for another potential run for president for you. Do you have plans to run again?
Joe Biden has already said he's running for re-election, and my job is to help him succeed as president. That's why I'm in this fight. I wrote Persist about the next 100 days, the work we need to do right now to build a future, not just for those at the top, but to build a future for everyone.
All right, in these next 100 days, there's going to be a lot in store. Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, author of Persist, thank you so much for joining me on Cheddar this afternoon. I sure hope you'll come back within this next 100 days.